Hey you guys, so today's video is going to be about radical love. Radical love. Okay, here we go. I'm in Orlando, in Florida, and I'm visiting a friend here on my way to Mexico. So next week I'll be in Mexico. I've decided to take a break from vlogging for a little bit, from travel vlogging, and instead talk to you about some concepts and kind of self-development tools and practices that I've been using. I think I've alluded to this before in previous videos. So to do with yoga, to do with radical love, things like that. And today's video is going to be about radical love, and we're starting with self-love. So I hope this is helpful for you guys. I have written my notes as usual. When it's an important video, I feel the need to just write down these concepts so that I have some structure. But for the most part, I'll just be speaking about this concept and the way it's been helping me, and I hope that that's going to help you guys as well. Also, I feel like we really need this at the moment. I think this is a really poignant time to be talking about radical love, given the elections in the US. I was here for it last week, and of course, the result is what it is, and hopefully this video is going to help you process the result of the US elections as well. But also similarly, there was an election in Sri Lanka, which of course I'm keeping up with that somewhat as well. And the election in Sri Lanka is also extremely significant for Sri Lankans, and also very nicely feeds into this concept of radical love. So radical love is a complete and unconditional love. It's the type of love that just kind of spills over out of you. And it's the sort of love that is completely without bounds. It's limitless. Okay, it's an infinite love. And it's a concept that is in many different philosophies. So it's part of Stoicism, it's part of Buddhism, it's part of yogic philosophy and Sanatana Dharma, which is the proper term for Hinduism. It's part of veganism as well. And also, I've also heard about it through my more from science, from psychology, from counseling and therapy. So they talked about it in cognitive behavior therapy, for example. So radical love is a state of mind. It's a state of mind that I've been cultivating for a long time now. And I've been influenced by all these other disciplines, the ones I just mentioned. Radical meaning complete, something that everyone can cultivate within themselves. And so hopefully in this video, you're going to find out what radical love looks like when it's self-love. And radical love always starts with the self, because it's only from a full cup of love that we can start to distribute that love to other people. Self-love is all over the internet at the moment. I've seen it all over social media, all over Instagram and TikTok. And self-love, I think there are lots of different ways in which people talk about self-love. Some of them I think have been helpful, some of them have been less helpful. Less helpful forms of self-love are kind of the shallow, surface level forms of love. So, Sunday, self-care Sunday, for example. I love self-care Sunday, big fan. But self-care Sunday seems to be all about face masks and, hair masks and relaxing, maybe going to a sauna or a steam room, or just looking after yourself, just kind of doing your grooming and your chores. But self-care can look much deeper than that. And self-care isn't just on Sundays. Self-care is something that we should be doing consistently over time, if not daily, if we can. And I have a list here of ways in which you can show self-love radically. One way you can show self-love is by identifying and meeting your needs. We all have needs, right? We do. We are human beings and we have these needs. We have physiological needs, we have emotional needs, we have physical needs. We have lots of different needs that need to be met. And most of them we can meet by ourselves. So most of the time, if it's a physical need, for example, food and exercise and things like that, those are needs that you can meet for yourself. When you're a child, those needs are met by your parents, right? When you're a child, if you've got good parents, they're going to feed you, they're going to clothe you, they're going to educate you or provide you with a means for education. And so you're going to have those needs met. And so you're going to get into these habits where you're meeting those needs yourself. If you grow up in a household where those physical needs are not met, you're not taught from a young age how to meet your physical needs. And so you need to start learning how to meet your physical needs, how to feed yourself properly, how to clothe yourself properly, how to look after that kind of basic physical dimension of your being. Then there are your emotional needs. We all need to be seen and heard and feel validated in our feelings and our emotions. We all need to feel that we matter, feel that we're valued. Those are deeper emotional needs that we have. And you can meet those needs yourself as well. So if you value yourself and you respect yourself and you if you feel sad and you make space for that sadness, if you feel joy and you make space for that joy, um, that's you meeting your own emotional needs. And by meeting your own emotional needs, you can create this sense of safety for yourself. By creating that sense of safety for yourself and meeting those needs for yourself, and of course, again, if you grow up in a household where your emotional needs are met, then you're going to grow up into somebody who knows what that feels like. But if you don't, you're going to need to learn how to meet those emotional needs yourself. And when you do meet those emotional needs yourself, you'll recognize when somebody else isn't able to meet your emotional needs. This is where people get stuck in relationships where their emotional needs are not met because they're not meeting those emotional needs for themselves first. So when you have an emotional need and you meet it yourself, and you're in a relationship where the emotional need is not met, you recognize that and you realize, okay, this person isn't able to meet my emotional need. And so that brings me to the next point, which is boundaries. So being able to teach somebody else how to love us, essentially. We know how to love ourselves. We know what self-love looks like. And so now, when you meet somebody, especially when it comes to relationships, and I'll do a separate video about attachments and attachment styles because that really plays a role in this, and also your personality type, and I've planned a video for that as well. Um, but essentially, boundaries teach people how you want to be loved, what you can and can't tolerate. And so, if you grow up boundaryless, as I did, by the way, so you grow up with this idea that you need to please everybody else. And if somebody makes you sad, oof, there's no room for that. So we're just going to have to, brush that under the rug and just keep on going, keep on putting a happy face on. And it doesn't really matter because essentially what you think and feel doesn't matter. And if you heal from that, you start realizing that there may be people in your life who have taken advantage of the fact that you don't have boundaries. So when you start setting boundaries, so clearly telling people what you want, what you need, what you can tolerate or what you can't tolerate, if somebody now is not showing you respect, for example, and you have learned to show yourself respect, so you know that, for example, examples so hard. So if you didn't respect yourself, let's say you didn't respect the way you speak to yourself, and you used to be quite mean to yourself in your head, and you were quite critical of yourself, so you tolerated other people being critical of you. When you start respecting yourself and you start being loving towards yourself, radically loving towards yourself, meaning you accept every flawed part of yourself and you give yourself that space to be loved unconditionally by yourself, when somebody else shows up and they treat you critically, they're critical of you as a person as opposed to your behavior, very different thing. They're like, oh, you're this or that or the other. They call you names and they show you disrespect and they shout at you. By showing yourself self love, by showing yourself radical love, you can now put into place boundaries. You can say, actually, I don't like to be talked to like that. That doesn't feel good for me. And when you say that, somebody who respects you is going to say, oh, okay, this doesn't feel good for that person. So I'm going to think about how I'm going to speak to this person to show them that I love them. Because you're teaching somebody how to love you. If you say to somebody, actually, you're shouting at me and I don't like that, and their response is to kind of shout harder, shout louder, or to say, oh, you're being difficult, you're being a problem, why can't I talk to you however I want? That is somebody who is not respecting your boundaries and how you want to be loved. So you teach people how to love you every time you set or don't set boundaries. So boundaries are another huge important component of self-love and radical love as a whole. This video is going to go on for a really long time if I talk about radical love. If I talk about everything, this video is going to go on for a really long time. So today I'm just going to focus on self-love, but know that this self-love is eventually going to lead to love for everyone. So we have identifying and meeting our needs, we have taking care of yourself physically, and we have boundaries. So with just those three tools alone, you already can see that the people who are not going to respect your boundaries are simply going to melt out of your life. That's what I found. Another act of love is to allow that to happen, allow that to unfold. Because the other thing I found is that it makes room for people who are able to respect your boundaries, who are able to show you love, how you deserve to be loved. Okay, so this takes us to the next point, which is another act of self love, which is to stop shaming, judging, and blaming yourself. Stop shaming yourself for anything, for any kind of feeling that you have, or any kind of uh, any physical attribute that you have, for example. So I grew up in an extremely shaming household. I grew up in and I think this rings true for a lot of South Asians in particular, but I mean, it's across the board. You don't have to be South Asian. You grow up in a household where you are constantly shamed, shamed for things that are out of your control, even. And so you grow up with that. And as a child, that's the dialogue that you got. And so when you're an adult, that's the dialogue that's in your head. So in your head, you have this critical voice, a critical voice that will shame you and blame you and judge you daily. Daily, moment to moment, you will be shamed and judged and blamed. And when you grow up with that voice, that can really affect your self esteem. One of the most powerful things that I did in terms of self love was to reprogram that voice in my head. So I no longer shame myself or blame myself or judge myself for things that are out of my control, or for things that are just simply who I am. So if, for example, this is a good one. I'm quite a forgetful person. It is literally just part of my personality. I'll talk about that in a future video. But I can be a clumsy and forgetful person. And there are steps I can take to make my life a little bit less clumsy, to make myself a little less clumsy. But to some extent, I know that I'm never going to be the most poised and physically organized person in the world. And so I stopped shaming myself for this. And that made all the difference. By accepting yourself as you are, you give yourself the space to be who you are without shame. Practicing this daily is going to help you cultivate this infinite store of love within yourself. So your body becomes, and this is where it becomes a more spiritual practice as well, is that your body becomes a vessel of love, a vessel of pure love, where you don't shame or judge or blame yourself. And so you don't shame or judge or blame other people. Like, people are sacred. As you learn to cultivate this self-love, you learn to see yourself as a sacred being. And by seeing yourself as a sacred being, you start to see others as sacred beings as well, regardless of what their views are, regardless of what their ideas or even their ideology. Even if they have a completely opposite ideology of the world, you can still see them as a sacred being. And by seeing them as a sacred being, you can communicate with them as a sacred being. You don't have to hate them. You don't have to be harsh with your words. You can hate ideologies. You can hate viewpoints. You can hate um, arguments that people have regarding, the world. But the individual is sacred. By seeing the individual as sacred, you make room for connection. You make room for connection between people who you might otherwise not have a connection with. Um, of course, we've talked about boundaries, so of course that connection can't come at the cost of your boundary. But if you are able to stand firm in your boundary and still treat that person with love and treat them as a sacred being, and they do the same with you, you now have a situation where you can talk to someone who has an entirely different viewpoint to you, and yet you can talk to them and have a connection with them. And what we desperately need in this world is more connection and less division, especially given what's happening politically at the moment. But that's why this video is so important, and that's why I wanted to make this video today, rather than just do like a usual travel vlog where I'm just walking around the world doing fun stuff. I wanted to make a video about radical love because I think it's needed. We need radical love. We need individuals to start cultivating radical love for themselves so that we can show that radical love to everybody else. Because you're no longer judging yourself, you're less likely to judge other people. And when you do find yourself judging somebody else, and I speak from experience when I say this, so hear me loud and clear, when you judge someone else, it is usually teaching you something about yourself. So when you find yourself judging somebody else, go inwards. And I've had to do this so many times. But go inwards because it's probably telling you something about yourself and probably has nothing to do with the other person in the first place. So, self love translates to love to other people. From this full cup of infinite love, you can relinquish control over other people and you can start to love other people instead. And by loving other people, I mean not controlling what they're doing and rather giving them space to vent or giving them space for their viewpoints, because as they get given that space, what we'll find is that those viewpoints might change, because many of those viewpoints, especially the ones that I disagree with, come from fear and pain. And if we can give people space to voice their anger, we end up coming to the root of the problem, which often, in my experience, is fear or pain. And when we get to that vulnerable emotion, that's when we can start cooking. That's when we can start cultivating love. That's when we can start giving them the space to love themselves too. This is an extremely healing experience. And I used to be very skeptical about healing and healers and things like that. But I'm on board. I'm on board completely. And I think healing is what everybody needs. I needed it. And I hope that this video maybe suspend some skepticism in yourself as well about healing and about radical love, because love, it's so cheesy. It's such a cheesy concept to say love yourself and love everybody else, and yet it's the answer as far as I can see. I've gone on this big journey of medical school, a biology degree, traveling around the world. I've had, I don't know, 27 different jobs and so much life experience at this point. And I've come back to this, it always circles back to this simple answer, and that is radical love. So when I say relinquish control, and this is the last point I'm going to make, I don't mean being passive, right? Being passive is not the same as relinquishing control. Relinquishing control simply means allowing people to express themselves however they want. and being there as a space for them to express themselves. If we see injustice, we can also be proactive in showing radical love, because radical love also looks like speaking up, especially if you have power. So, relinquishing control and using your power in ways that you can to show radical love. I know it sounds paradoxical, but it's 100% doable. And many of these things are paradoxical. I know that many of the things that I say may sound like paradoxes. On the one hand, I'm saying, let people be and let them have the viewpoints and let them do whatever they want. On the other hand, I'm saying be proactive and step into conversations and tell people that what they're doing is harming others. And I think both of those things are true, and context matters greatly with these things. So, where you can, where you have the power, step in, be proactive, and from a place of love, start voicing the concerns that you have to make the world a better place. And at the same time, in other times, it's better to relinquish control, take a step back, and allow things to unfold as they do. So I will leave it up to you. It's up to you, really. Use your own discernment about when each method is appropriate. We can be part of striving for a better world, and at the same time, we can maintain our sense of self love and show up in the world in the best way possible for ourselves and what looks right for us. So, whew, what a long video. Um, so that's what I had to say today. This is my video on radical love for the self, and I'm going to do future videos on how that looks when we love other people, although I've kind of touched on it already today. Just to give you guys some insight into what this is doing to me making these videos. As I've said, I did a little 2-minute video about thank you for 1,000 subscribers. And again, I want to thank all my subscribers, because making these videos is so healing for me. I've been sitting on these ideas and not being able to make these videos for such a long time. And I know what it is. I can feel it right now. It's fear, right? There is a deep fear within me about saying the things I'm saying right now, fear of backlash and fear that I might be wrong. But for now, and I know where that comes from as well. It comes from being told that I'm wrong my whole life, from people who matter, people who are close to me. And so I'm trying to overcome that fear by making videos like these right now. I really hope that you found it helpful. Give it a like, and please do subscribe, because I've got lots of videos coming up like this one, but also ones about Myers-Briggs and personality types. That's coming, you guys. I've got a lot of information and work coming your way. Until next time, embody love for yourself and for everyone else. Thank you so much for listening. Bye bye.